Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Angela Knierim. I'm a life sciences lawyer at Taylor Wessing, and today we will talk about advertising law. Just have a look how many already joined. I think we can start now. People are still joining, but let's start. Let's start with a look at the agenda. What are we talking about today? We'll start with a question: what is advertising? How is it defined? Is it actually defined by law? And then we'll continue with an overview about the restrictions for advertising in the life sciences sector, and then have a focus on the prohibition of misleading advertising. And then we'll continue with a question: what is sufficient scientific evidence? I'll explain why this point is crucial with regard to the prohibition of misleading advertising. Then we'll have a brief look at the question what the particularities for social media are, and eventually we'll also have a look at the consequences in case of any infringement. So let's start. Let's start with the question: what is advertising? Advertising is not defined by law, even though the term is crucial for all the restrictions that apply. There are general rules regulated in the Unfair Competition Act, the UWG, and special regulations for advertising therapeutic products in the Heimische Werbegesetz, the Therapeutic Products Advertising Act. And the provisions of the HWG only apply to product-related advertising, but the HWG doesn't define what is product-related advertising. But the case law has already dealt with this question. There are several judgments from the Federal Court of Justice, and according to this case law, advertising for a medicinal product in the sense of the HWG includes all product or performance-related statements that aim to promote the sale of the advertised medicinal product. So there is an objective and a subjective component. Sorry, I was just distracted a little bit by the questions, and I should point out that you please feel free to raise any questions in the chat. I will see if we'll make it in time, and then I will come back to all of your questions. If not, I will come back to you after the webinar. So please feel free to raise all your questions also during the presentation, and then we'll figure out when I'll answer them. Okay, so we have an objective and a subjective component, but the courts are very strict, and in practice, more or less, the courts will only look at the objective component. And as a rule of thumb, you can remember that any statement about the product or its performance will in doubt be considered as product-related advertising. And what sometimes clients find surprising, even objective and neutral factual statements about the product might be considered as product-related advertising. So it doesn't need to be excessively promotional. Even neutral statements can be product-related advertising. When do you want to avoid product-related advertising? First of all, of course, product-related advertising also in the healthcare sector is, of course, generally permissible. But there are several exceptions where you want to avoid to fall within the scope of the HWG, where you do not want to make any product-related statements. This is the pre-launch activities. It is impermissible to advertise medicinal products before the marketing authorization for the product has been granted. This is regulated in Section 3a, first sentence HVG. So in these cases, it's generally not possible to make any product-related statements. The other case are the prescription-only medicinal products, the so-called RX products, where it is impermissible to advertise them to the public. And this is defined in the so-called narrow definition of healthcare professionals, other persons than doctors, dentists, veterinary surgeons, pharmacists, and persons who are permitted to trade in these medicines, for example, wholesalers. So in these cases, you cannot make any product-related statements to, for example, patients. I will come to possible forms of communications in these cases on the next slides, but that's as a starting point. In these cases, it's impermissible to make product-related statements for medicinal products. So what do you do in these cases? Everything what's not product related. This could be disease awareness campaigns where you describe the disease and several options of treatment are presented, for example, including nutrition, non-medical approaches. And if this is described in a neutral manner and the specific products are not named or identifiable, this could be a way to communicate also to patients in case of RX products. Another very common solution are patient support programs. I've seen a lot of apps, for example, they are very prominent in the sector of chronic diseases, MS, or also morbus Crohn. In these indications, we see that a lot, or also cancer. And when it comes to pre-launch activities, an option would be the communication about milestones. That is permissible. Also, if the product is not identifiable by the trade name, and when the milestones are communicated in a neutral and not excessively promotional way, this also could be a permissible measure. And of course, corporate advertising. Corporate advertising is basically, as the name suggests, advertising the company but not the product. For example, we know this from TV spots where simply the name of the company is displayed or the logo, just to make the people remember. If I go to the pharmacy, I could ask for the product from this company. This is called product advertising, or as a form of trust advertising. And where do you draw the line? There is also case law from the federal court. It depends, as always, on the concrete context. What is in the foreground? Is it the company, or are medicinal products identifiable? Are they maybe displayed or in any other way referred to? So this could also be an option for these cases when you do not want to make any product-related statements, as we've just seen. Which further restrictions apply? This is a not conclusive overview of some of the most important restrictions in the German HVG. The prominent circle in the middle makes up to, I would say, almost 90% of all cases in practice. It's the most common we see when it comes to complaints are infringements of the prohibition of misleading advertising. There are provisions for medicinal products, procedures, and treatments in the HVG. And since we have the medical devices regulation, the MDR, we also have a specific regulation for medical devices, and medical devices do not fall under Section 3 of the HVG anymore. And of course, we have the general restrictions in the UWG. So misleading advertising in practice is the most common complaint. That's why we'll talk about this a bit more in the coming minutes. But there are also several other restrictions. For example, as I already mentioned, the prohibition of pre-marketing before marketing authorization has been granted. Also, the prohibition of off-label marketing. That means marketing outside basically marketing outside the marketing authorization for indications that have not been authorized. We also have a specific regulation in the MDR now. The scope is not 100% clear yet. Some say it's generally prohibited to advertise off-label for medical devices now. Others say only if this is indeed and in fact misleading. And if it is not, and if it is clear that it is off-label, off-label marketing could be permissible. So this is not eventually finally clear so far, but as far as I see, most of the opinions tend to the position that off-label marketing is generally impermissible for medical devices now, as we already have it with the medicinal products. What else do we have? We have some formal requirements, the basis information for medicinal products as regulated in Section 4 HWG. There is also very important in practice, actually, the general prohibition of granting benefits. You probably all have heard of it when it comes to compliance questions. No giveaways for healthcare professionals. I think this is a well-known prohibition. Also, since we have now the corresponding regulations in the Criminal Act. There's a general ban on advertising remote treatments with an exception. There has also been a judgment of the Federal Court of Justice recently, and there is a ban on advertising to the general public. I already mentioned that for the RX products and also for certain diseases in Section 12 HWG. The prohibition of misleading advertising, as I mentioned, is the most important regulation in advertising law, which makes most of the complaints. What does it mean? It means that it is prohibited to create an objectively incorrect impression on the addressees of the measure of the statements and create a deception about the factual circumstances which misleads them in the end, actively or by omission. You could also do it with actually presenting correct facts and by omitting other important information, which still could be considered misleading. And I've already mentioned that Section 3 HWG does not apply to medical devices anymore. For medical devices, the prohibition of misleading advertising can now be found in Article 7 MDR, which, by the way, also important, does not only apply to advertising, but also to mere information like the labeling, instructions for use, etc. How can you determine whether a statement could be considered misleading advertising? There are basically 3 steps. First, the first thing the courts would do is to have a look who is the addressee of the information, to whom is the statement addressed, because this is important for their horizon. How would they understand it? Is it a physician who has already basic knowledge on diseases and is better capable of understanding the context of the statement? Or is it a patient who might never have heard of the disease before, has no basic knowledge about it, and needs maybe further explanation, not to become a wrong impression. So this is the starting point. To whom is the statement addressed? How much do I have to explain, or how much can I assume is already there knowledge-wise? The second question is, how will the addressee understand the statement? And normally, or the courts refer to a normal person, not a particular intelligent or particular educated person, just a normal average consumer who has no special medical knowledge, unless it's a statement directed at healthcare professionals. And the third question would be, is this understanding correct? So does it correspond to the facts? Is it factually correct? And as I said, also if I leave information out, I could create a false, an objectively false impression. Very common in practice, because it's attractive from a marketing perspective, is cherry picking. So let's say you have a clinical study and some of the results are not so favorable, others are very attractive to use for marketing. And if only the positive results are being presented, this could also create a false impression by cherry picking. Eye catchers. In German, the Blickfangwerbung is also used quite often. What does it mean? There is an eye-catching statement, and the problem with eye-catching statements is that, in particular in the medical sector, often more explanation is needed to actually be correct and accurate. So if I just use a short statement, a Twitter line that doesn't really explain the context and doesn't give much information, this could easily be considered misleading. So what do you do? In practice, it's common to use asterisks, the Sternchenhinweise. They all use it to further explain the statement in the footnote. And this is generally permissible. That's not a problem, but it can become a problem if I have divergent messages. So if I say something in the eye catcher and actually correct it in the footnote because it wasn't quite accurate, this would be considered misleading. I cannot say something wrong in the eye catcher and then correct it in the footnote. If it's just a statement that needs further explanation, that's fine. You can do that. But the further clarification must participate in the eye catcher. So if you have a brochure of 45 pages and you have an eye catcher on page 1 on the title, and on page 45 in the footnote, very small, you say, yeah, it was actually a little bit different than said in the eye catcher, this probably would not be considered sufficient. So the correction statement or the further explanation must be placed in proximity to the eye catcher statement. And also the reference in the footnote must be readable. So it's common to refer to a 6-point font size. This is generally be considered big enough to be easily read. But of course, also with colors, it must be clearly readable. So it shouldn't be white on white background. That's actually logic, but we do see cases like that, so it must be readable. And also, what I also do see often in practice, that the asterisks are not clearly assigned. So it's actually easy to do so with numbering them. So you have the star, the asterisks, and then 1, 2, 3, whatever. So you can clearly assign the asterisks to a certain statement. And this often goes wrong in practice, so you don't really know how to assign the further explanation to the actual statement. So we come to the question how to back up your statements. In advertising in the healthcare, in the life sciences sector, there is the principle of strictness. That means that when it comes to health-related advertising claims, there are particularly strict requirements that apply because of the aim to protect public health. So as a starting point, courts are very strict. And there is you can say a landmark judgment of the Federal Court of Justice, Basisinsulin mit Gewichtsvorteil, basal insulin with weight advantage, where the Federal Court of Justice has very clearly and very detailed explained what's required when advertising in the life sciences sector. And the Federal Court of Justice has found that it is misleading and therefore inadmissible to advertise with health-related technical statements if the advertising does not correspond to established scientific knowledge. This means that if the advertising claim lacks any scientific backup, it is impermissible. It is also impermissible if you have a study, if it is based on a study, but the study actually does not support the claim. For example, because it's not scientifically sufficient, it's not scientifically sound, maybe it's just an observational study. If the study reveals doubts that are not reflected in the advertising, these doubts are normally addressed in the limitations. When you read the study, the abstract of the study or the full publication, they are always indicated what the limitations are. For example, small patient population. If you have a study with a patient population of 23 patients, that's normally not enough. That's normally not a representative size of the patient population. So you would have to make that clear, but I will come to that also in a bit. Another case is if the advertising is based on a controversial opinion, and this is not mentioned. It is not mentioned that it's scientifically controversial. This could also be considered as misleading. So what is sufficient? What is sufficient scientific evidence? The Federal Court of Justice has also referred to this question in the basal insulin judgment and has found that generally a so-called gold standard study is required. And this means a prospective randomized placebo-controlled double-blinded study that, and this is sometimes sometimes it's easily forgotten in practice, that also has to be adequately statistically evaluated and published. So it's not only you have to have the study, it generally also should be published. And we have a slightly different situation when it comes to medical devices, because the judgment of the Federal Court I was just referring to was about insulin, which means it's about a medicinal product. We do not have yet a judgment of the Federal Court of Justice regarding medical devices. So there is kind of a disagreement among the regional courts and the higher regional courts whether these principles the Federal Court of Justice has outlined in the Basisinsulin Gewichtsvorteilentscheidung, whether this also applies to medical devices. So some of the courts are of the opinion that you also need a gold standard study for medical devices. And the other part says it's actually not possible in all of the cases to double blind. So it should be sufficient if the study is based on objectively measurable results and there is no bias or no risk of bias. Now we come to the checklist. How can you evaluate whether the study you base your claim on is sufficient? So first question, is there a scientific study for all claims, for all technical claims? Is it a gold standard study? If it is not a gold standard study, it doesn't mean you can't use it at all, but it means that the wording should be rather cautious. The wording should avoid phrases like it has been proven. The wording should be rather cautious. Another question, was it actually a study exclusively with the company's products, or were there maybe other products other than the comparative studies, but was it really the company's product? I do see it in practice that sometimes companies advertise with scientific studies that actually have not been conducted with the company's products. The next question, are the results significant and not just numerically better? So is it really statistically significant, the result? And also, is it clinically relevant, or is it something that doesn't have any relevance in practice for the patient? Do I refer to is my result, is it a primary endpoint, or is it just a secondary endpoint? And if so, is it indicated in my advertising? If graphics from a study are used, they are often altered. So this could also be misleading if I don't disclose. So it should be, if graphics are altered, they should have a disclaimer that they're modified. The limitations I already mentioned, have they been disclosed? For example, small patient population. Is the study cited correctly? And asterisks I've already mentioned before, are they clearly assigned and are they readable? With regard to the time, I will quickly come to social media and then say a few words about the consequences of infringements because we run out of time. Particularities for social media, there are no specific statutory regulations, but there are regulations that should be borne in mind. The prohibition of surreptitious advertising, Schleichwerbung. Advertising must be clearly labeled as such. It must be clear that it is advertising and not, and this must not be. This must be clear. We also have now a regulation in the UWG that when it comes to influencer marketing, if there is a consideration in exchange, this speaks for a commercial purpose and for advertising. We quickly have a look at the consequences of infringements. In most of the time, in most cases, the contents will be civil law. Very common are warning letters from competitors with a request for the declaration of a cease and desist, signing of the cease and desist declaration with a contractual penalty. And if this is not signed, it could come to PI proceedings or a normal action on the merits. Very rare are claims for damages. I've just listed them for completeness. And what do you do when you receive a warning letter? First of all, timing is crucial because the deadlines are always very short. Sometimes it's only 3 days, so you have to be quick. It could be of advantage to ask for an extension of the deadline and to have that documented. And then, of course, it should be assessed whether the claim is actually justified or not, and to react accordingly. You can sign the cease and desist letter, you can sign it in a modified way, or you can reject it and file a protective letter, which you can file to the registry of the courts. And if your competitor will go to court with a PI application, the courts will read the protective letter and not issue the PI ex parte. So we have to be quick. There are also administrative law consequences. They are not so common in practice. I rather see them when it comes to cosmetics, not so much when it comes to medical devices and medicinal products. And of course, there's also criminal law in the event of intentional misleading advertising, which is, I have to say, extremely rare in practice. And with that, we already come to the end of our webinar. If there are any questions, please feel free to also reach out via email. You find my contact here, so please do reach out. And for now, I thank you for joining. And I would like to point out our next session will be on 18 December. So please register now. My colleague Manja Epping will talk about combination products and companion devices. And for now, I thank you for joining and hope you have a nice day. Bye.